Well, you knew this was coming. I mean, we're close to June at this point, so you figure with the Switch 2 less than 2 weeks away now, people would start to, of course, look towards June when it comes to a Nintendo Direct, and now it's starting to make the rounds a bit that, yes, Nintendo is planning an event for next month. Go figure, since, I mean, yeah, they usually do a direct of some kind in June. However, this one is going to be kind of interesting because it will immediately follow up the launch of a new generation for the company with the Switch 2. And that means to me it should be a pretty big direct, because not only will they be focusing on things in the immediate, but also stuff maybe well down the line to at least give an idea as to what their plans are for this generation that is, going to be the most expensive one that they've technically tried to sell here early on, alongside, of course, of an $80 Mario Kart. But let's take a look at some of the possibilities here today and what exactly is being said. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Now, I'm bringing up the fact that this is the most expensive system that they've really tried to sell at launch, mostly because Furukawa also kind of discussed this during the investors Q&A recently, and a lot of it seemed to come down to, we're doing this system, the innovation is that it allows us to do bigger and better games. We have ideas that we couldn't do before on the Switch, so now we're going to do them on the Switch too, which you figure means, okay, we should have some pretty impressive or at least intriguing announcements for different games. Now, if we take a look, this is posted up over on Universo Nintendo, translated over, saying, according to journalist, content creator, that's from PH Brazil, in a live broadcast on the YouTube channel, Nintendo is planning to host a Nintendo Direct during the launch week of the Nintendo Switch or the week after the console arrives. Now, I essentially read that as there's a Direct in June because, I mean, look, you can kind of guess or at least try to figure it out here. To me, I think there are 2 weeks they would do it. I don't think it would happen the same week that the Switch 2 launches, considering the Switch 2, it really comes out on Thursday. I know many people will be going to the midnight releases who are picking up the system and getting it Wednesday night, right, in their mind. But the idea is it's going to be available at retail on Thursday. I don't know if you do a Direct on the same day that the system comes out. I also don't know if you do a Direct the day before or even just earlier in that week, because all eyes at that point are on the Switch 2 system launch alongside of a brand new Mario Kart, which it's been a long time since we've had a new Mario Kart. We got to go back to like the Wii U days for that. I mean, we didn't get a brand new Mario Kart the entirety of this 8-year run for the Switch 1. So I think with that in mind, Nintendo may be looking at that as that's enough for all the stuff that'll be happening with PR and really trying to get information out there to the customer base. Maybe the following week. Really, to me, it might even be the week after. I don't think it's the final week in June, mostly because they're going to have their annual gathering of the shareholders, which will be happening in the 85th annual general meeting of shareholders. It's on their investor relations calendar here, and that'll be happening June 27th, which I believe is a Friday. But still, I don't know if you would have it that week with all of that going on. So I think it's either the week, it would be the week after the Switch 2, or I kind of think most likely sometime during the week of I'll say the 16th. So somewhere in there between the 16th and the 20th, I will just throw a guess out there and say maybe the 17th or the 18th of that week. All right, it's like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, somewhere in there. But nonetheless, I think we can all kind of expect a Direct of some kind, most likely a big general Direct in June. Lines up with what you usually would do with E3 and that kind of thing. Okay, so now it comes back to, what would they show during this Direct? Well, the obvious answer here would be Switch 2 games, whether it's dates for ones that have already been announced or brand new announcements. But keep in mind, Nintendo is still pushing for the Switch 1, and they should be, since they've kind of already said in a way that didn't necessarily go over well online, but in a way, that the Switch 1 will still be around and will still be at least some sort of entry point for customers who maybe are looking at the Switch 2 and want to give it some time to grow, or even, I don't know, maybe get revised down to a Switch 2 Lite or something and get cheaper, or anything there. But the library for the Switch 1, it's quite substantial. I know the Switch 2 is backwards compatible, but you could get a Switch Lite right now for $200 or less, and maybe that makes more sense for you currently. And I mean, look, again, the library of games, you're not going to be disappointed. So I think Nintendo will still want to do Switch 1 stuff here, okay? I think that's very important to note, which we'll come back to that, since that could even be an entire section, or maybe something that you have to keep an eye out after each game is shown. So to start, Nintendo, I think they would be front-loading the Switch 2 the release with a bunch of games. It worked for the Switch 1. Breath of the Wild launched, then the two big titles during the launch year, really, both of them nominated for Game of the Year at the end of 2017, was Mario Odyssey and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, they still had some other stuff, clearly, that was there. They had a new Splatoon game that, of course, moved over Mario Kart, which ended up being the best-selling game of the entire generation. They still had Xenoblade that they snuck in there. So, I mean, there were, and other stuff, ARMS, things like that. So there were things there to get outside of that, but the big two pillars certainly work to move units. I think that's a similar formula here, but even more so that they'll be doing. Okay, so the first thing to me is that they have to date some of these games. They've already put 2025 on a few of them, so Kirby Air Ride, that needs to be dated. A Drag X Drive, that's for the summer, so that could even be as soon as end of July or even early August. The Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, so there's your Zelda game for 2025. I know it's a Warriors kind of game and might not mesh with everyone, but there you go. It's a Zelda game to close out the year. Metroid Prime 4 desperately needs that release date. I mean, it is weird to think that's a game that we found out about 3 months after the Switch 1 came out, and we're talking about getting a release date still with the Switch 2 right around the corner, a couple weeks out, right? So that's crazy to think about. Also, a couple of, we'll say, third-party games could show up with their release dates. Final Fantasy VII Intergrade, still waiting on that. Elden Ring, that kind of thing. So I do feel like those are going to be some big announcements. Pokemon Legends ZA, the Pokemon Company, sure, but that needs a release date as well, and we're looking towards, I guess, the end of the year for that to make it in for the holiday gift-giving season for a new Pokemon game. Of course, that being cross-generation, make it so that they will have a pretty large audience to sell to, but it kind of looks like, just based on the performance of the Switch version versus Switch 2, it looks very night and day, and it looks like exactly what Game Freak needed there was just a more powerful system to play their Switch 1 games. But otherwise, though, Switch 1 titles, I feel like Kirby Planet Robobot would be here as well. And, there's been a Fire Emblem game that's been kicked around for quite a while. Someone said maybe it's a remake of an older title or something. It just seems like that would be one that they might have a Switch 1 version of. And I think what's going to happen, you'll see these games pop up, and they'll have two logos. They'll have the Switch 1 logo and the Switch 2 logo, because, of course, it'll play on it. But also, these games may just have versions that are ready to go, free, quote-unquote, upgrades, or maybe just it'll be like $10 more on the Switch 2. And that's kind of how they'll sell it there, I assume. Just performance boost, resolution boost, HDR seemed to be a big thing for them there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you'll see one or two of them try to do the 120 hertz on handheld. So I don't really know what that's going to do for your Fire Emblem, but maybe, Kirby Planet Robobot, you could at least get some use out of that there. Also, for NSO, GameCube Games, they're going to probably do one a month, I figure. They kind of let it slip by accident, at least I kind of think they did, in the Treehouse, that the next game up after the initial 3 that'll launch will be Mario Strikers. So they had that loaded up, and they're like, how did that get there? they kind of just walk past it. It's like, okay, that's the one you have loaded up there on a system, maybe to capture footage or show off in a trailer or something. So yeah, I know it's just one game, but that's kind of how I think they're going to play it with this library of titles, which, hey, in 2 years, that should be a pretty solid lineup of, 25 games or so. But hey, for the GameCube, that should be pretty good. Also, I wonder if Nintendo would pull a 2DS XL situation here with the Switch 1, where they revised the lineup down. And at that time, if you remember, way back then, 2017, we were all talking about the Switch. And then here's Nintendo showing up with a new 3DS system, a 2DS XL. Everyone was confused, but it worked to lower the price, and it basically phased out all the other versions, and you had the 2DS XL, which was just what was available at retail. So I almost wonder if they have plans to do that, to kind of phase out the OLED, and then also phase out the red box Switch and have just this singular system, and maybe they get it down to $250, and that's a way for them to at least have some sort of I guess, better budget option. It still would have a dock and functionality that way rather than just being a Switch Lite at $200 with none of that. So I do think price drops, or maybe even a revision like this, would make sense for them to continue the momentum of the Switch. And I think there is still life in that system, considering Nintendo has already put a year on titles in 2026 for the Switch 1. And trust me, I'm sure there are plenty of third parties that would like for that system to at least stay somewhat relevant, especially indie developers where their games would work really well, and of course be able to spread out to a large install size as that be able to transition over that size of an install base of 150 million plus. It's going to take some time, considering Nintendo is scrambling right now to try to get to 15 to even 20 million has been floated. I mean, that's just in a year. It's going to take a while just to produce enough systems to build up the install size. But of course, that also means you're going to need games. Now, they are launching with Mario Kart, big game. Went over a bunch of other titles that will work to round out the rest of the year with, I think right now, looking up and down the list, the one that I'm the most excited for right now is Metroid Prime 4. Clearly, that is a really sharp-looking game, by the way, on the Switch 2. I know it is a Switch 1 game that is being moved to the system, but the performance they're going for, the art style with Retro Studios, and sort of their ability to pull a lot out of, the Switch, I think that's a game clearly that is, you could say is too big, quote unquote, for the Switch 1, but it fits right in with that Switch 2. 4K 60, 120 frame, 120 hertz mode, the whole thing, mouse support. I know, again, Switch 1 game looks like it was really designed with the Switch 2 in mind, really, but still, that's the one I'm looking forward to the most. However, there is potential for Nintendo to do something pretty big here. Now, we know Donkey Kong Bonanza, that's out in July. Speculation's been running around that that's what the 3D Mario team has been working on completely. Like, that's it. So there would be no time for there to be a 3D Mario game available. I don't think that's the case. So I'm looking at the list of titles. I don't know if there's anything here that I would point to and say that is the big holiday game for a system's first time on the market that year for that holiday. I feel like they need the 1-2 punch like they had before, where they had a big 3D Zelda game and a big 3D Mario game. They need the other pillar, and I do kind of think it's a new 3D Mario game. And again, I know it sounds crazy. It's like, well, here's Donkey Kong Bonanza. Could they really have another 3D Mario game? Yes, because it's been a while since Mario Odyssey, and I think that team has been working on 2 games, really. Well, again, we'll find out with the credits of Bonanza, but I think that 3D Mario game is almost ready to go, and it would make sense to launch it for the holiday season for this sort of a system. Again, it worked really well when they did it with the Switch 1, and I know it's Mario and then Mario again, but they're different enough to me to still catch on and work really well. 3D Mario just sells. And it's a way for them to sell this, again, more expensive system during the holiday season. And in a way, I actually hope that is the case, because I'm very curious to see what their concept is. What's the big twist for a new 3D Mario game with this sort of technology that they have available to them? After seeing what was being done with Donkey Kong Bonanza, with all of the destruction, I can't even imagine what their big thing is for the 3D Mario title. But I'm intrigued. Maybe it is a big open world Mario game. I don't know, but there's a lot of possibilities there. I wonder if there are Switch 2 upgrades, as we've seen some set up for launch. I still think there are many games out there that could definitely utilize just enhancements from the Switch 1 library. And the fact that they dated all those enhancements that are set up as free patches for launch day as just June 5th makes me think that, yes, there will be many more of them to come, and it might even become kind of a recurring thing during these directs to just point out a few and say, hey, look, here's some free upgrades that are coming for your backlog, or maybe even games that you've looked at and you've seen the performance, you're like, I don't know if I really want to buy into that or get into that now. It's a way to kind of sell some of their evergreen titles a bit more. So I'd be curious to see what they have lined up. Let me know which games you would like to see them maybe lift the frame rate cap on, or even just completely smooth out or fix up the resolution, add HDR. They've kind of gone over a list with some of the current upgrades, and I think some of them are going to be quite substantial for a few of these titles, making them, I don't want to say playable, but more playable. It's just some of those games were definitely struggling on that Switch 1. So we have the holiday game figured out with maybe a new 3D Mario game. They've kind of worked to set up their their release calendar where, I mean, it feels like they have one game a month from first party now. But third party, while I talked about Final Fantasy VII Integrate from Square Enix, Elden Ring from Bandai Namco, I do think Capcom, while they have Street Fighter 6, maybe it's time for them to start moving over some of those Resident Evil remake games like Resident Evil 2, 3, 4. I mean, sure, they have plenty they can pull from. Maybe they can grab Resident Evil Village and that kind of thing. So Capcom, maybe they're just to unload all these Resident Evil remakes. But the one that I think everyone's looking at and is like, is it finally time? Is Microsoft going to show? Is Phil Spencer going to pop up in a direct? Maybe. I mean, it's not really necessary. They can just say, hey, look, here's this game from Microsoft. Here's this game from Microsoft. Just kind of transition through it normally like they do. Not necessarily the sizzle reel, but the quick announcer saying, hey, this legendary figure is heading to the Switch, and there's Master Chief. I think having Halo or a Forza would be, I mean, it would be something that would kind of need a double take from people, since it's like, wow, Microsoft really is in a Nintendo Direct with one of their big three titles, right? I think some games people are expecting but won't be ready. Like, I've heard that something like Elder Scrolls, the newest, like Oblivion remake, that's not necessarily one that's being worked on currently. Even Gears, that's another one. Apparently not necessarily coming anytime soon. But I think something like Sea of Thieves would make sense. I feel like Psychonauts 2 would work beautifully on the Switch. That'd be a really cool game to have there. But for me, like, let's just get Halo going here. Let's just get this off and running. Let's make the move already. And then obviously it's Microsoft, so this is included, but Call of Duty, you figure that's going to be there as well. But, I do think this is going to be a huge direct for Nintendo, and I do think it makes sense for them to go further into the future for the generation. They don't have to do the thing where they go, hey, tune in to see the next 6 to 12 months or something. They could show you something that's not going to be ready for a couple of years. They could legitimately sit down and be like, hey, here's an idea for a 3D Zelda game that you're not going to see for a while. They did it with Tears of the Kingdom. A sequel for Breath of the Wild is coming. And then we actually get it like 3 years down the line. So it's possible. It's something they could do. Maybe they talk about an Ocarina of Time remake, but it's not out till next year. Maybe that 3D Mario game that I think is coming this holiday isn't until next holiday. Maybe Monolith Soft wants to show up with their next big, ridiculous Xenoblade-like game, although I think it's going to be something new. But a way to show off what they can do with even stronger hardware than the Switch, although some of these Xenoblade games, it makes you wonder how they are doing it, where the world itself is massive. And at times when you play something like Xenoblade Chronicles X, feels like there's no limits because you're just flying around everywhere in this huge world. But that's the thing I'm really excited about for the Switch 2, is seeing what Nintendo from a first-party perspective can do with it. I know there's so much conversation around third-party games. I just don't know if that's the big needle mover for people. No, they're like, okay, what can Nintendo first-party do with a system that NVIDIA has quoted to say is 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1. So that's where I am with it. Let's see, Nintendo, what you got for us. But let me know what you guys think about this down below in the comments. Are you surprised to hear that there's probably a direct in June? I'm not, but what would you like to see there? What big announcements are there? Any surprises you have in mind as to what they could have at least up their sleeve for the start of this new generation? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.